Well, I was watching those YouTube videos on the sovereign citizens. You can find them in America. I think there's about 1 million of these sovereign citizens, and they're basically driving trucks around. And then when they get stopped by the police say, "Can you give me your driving license, please? Because you're waving all over the road. You've got an open bottle of gin. You know, you've just hit a car back there, and you haven't got a number plate." And they say, "Well, no, I don't have to. I'm a sovereign citizen." And then normally the police officer sighs. He gets really upset, and he just goes. He doesn't bother arguing. He's heard it so many times. He normally just calls for backup and says, I've got a sovereign citizen, another one. There are millions of them in Florida, Michigan, Utah, wherever you go. And calls for backup, and then backup comes and says, "What's the problem?" And he says, "Well, I'm a sovereign citizen." Well, are you saying that you're not going to give me your driving license, your insurance, and your vehicle registration? And the guy says, or the girl says, "I don't have to by law. You know, I'm protected under the Constitution. I am a free man. I am not driving. I am traveling, and I'm allowed to travel freely under the Constitution." Okay, so what happens? The consequences of him saying that, of course, are that he doesn't have to buy insurance. He doesn't have to get his vehicle registered. He doesn't have to have number plates. He doesn't have to follow any of the rules of the road. But the consequences are that he's going to get tasered, and then he's going to get dragged to jail. Most of us, I don't think, would like those consequences. So we put a tax disc on our car, don't we? We put a little tax disc on the car. It's about 100 quid, isn't it, these days? And that means we don't have to look over our shoulder all the time. We don't have to be kind of going down the back roads. We don't have to be, keeping in the shadows and driving only at certain times of the day when we think we're not going to get stopped. And every time we see a white car, we think, "Oh Christ, is that a bloody police car?" And so we think it's a very small price to pay for peace of mind. But US citizens, they think a bit differently. They've got themselves into a little bit of a kind of frenzy about the sort of the many different layers there are of government. And you've got federal law, you've got county law, you've got state law, you've got municipal law, you've got all the different kind of layers of law. And they've kind of joined a little club that means that they think they found a loophole. And they often say they might say to the arresting officer, they might say, "Well, this is a waste of your time because the judge will let me off, because judges now are accepting constitutional sovereignty for people like me who are traveling, and I'm not driving, I'm traveling." Okay, magic words they use in order to try and beat the system. Are they trying to beat the system on principle? Well, maybe they think so, but generally, a lot of these people who claim to be sovereign citizens actually would struggle to pass a driving test, and they would also struggle to pay for insurance, which is not that cheap these days. But, you know, as we know in UK, them's the rules of the road. We have road traffic violations, and that's it. It's not complicated, and we either obey them or we don't drive on the road. And we realise that it's not just about us, it's also about other road users. If we have a car that doesn't have an MOT, then it can be dangerous, and we don't want to knock over a child on a pedestrian crossing because the brakes don't work. All right. But I am interested in this because I was trying to think, what is the equivalent of a sovereign citizen in Europe, I mean in the UK, and why we don't have them here. I've never heard anybody call themselves a sovereign citizen here, but I have heard people talk occasionally about being an anarchist. But I've never met any really successful anarchists. The only one I've known closely was a guy who spent most of the time at home in his long johns, watching old movies and stuff, and he was on the dole, and he used to obsessively buy things from China on Temu. Little gadgets, like he bought a surveillance camera for his cat for about £3, so that he could see where his cat goes at night. And he was an anarchist. He claimed he was an anarchist. He identified as an anarchist. I don't know what was anarchistic about that. I think he was an anarchist because he thought, why should I work? I mean, that's what it seemed to be. Why should I work? Doesn't seem to be very anarchistic to me. I don't know, but I mean, there is a class of anarchism in the UK, isn't there? There are areas of Wales down in the sort of southwest where, you know, there are a lot of people who are living in tents in the forest, and they might well call themselves anarchists. We just don't have that background. We don't have the militia movement. We don't have the survivalists. We're not really riding around in pickups, and we're not really anti-state in the way that some people in the US are. We don't have a constitution either, so we can't rely on some sort of form of primitive constitutional rights. But it is fascinating just how people are prepared to accept the consequences of claiming they're a sovereign citizen. And as I said, it normally means getting tasered a couple of times and then sort of ending up in jail time after time after time after time. I mean, there's probably a little bit of American romanticism in all this. They do say America is not a nation, it's a kind of story. And I think the story they tell themselves is they're sort of free to roam the land. And they've probably watched too many Westerns where there are drifters. And drifters just drift from town to town. Nobody's asking them for their ID. Nobody's asking them if they've got a license to ride a horse. Nobody wants to know their name particularly. If they do want to know their name, they might just give them a first name. They can carry a gun openly. They don't have to conceal a weapon in certain states. And if they want a job, they'll get work, and then they just get paid in cash at the end of the day. And there's no questions asked. And I think that they kind of, in a way, they're kind of being a little bit romantic about that is still possible in the sort of societies in which we live. It's a very God-fearing country. I mean, they have no concept at all about sort of Christianity, the traditional Christianity ideas, obviously. But I mean, they like the prosperity gospel, which is God will provide you with abundance, money. They call it abundance. They don't use the word money if you are reverential. But and it could be the fact that, you know, this is God's land, and I'm free to live in it. You know, I don't give a damn about your rules and regulations. I was born into a world. I didn't ask to be born. I'm here, and I'm going to do my own thing. You know, I got a lot of sympathy with that, but I think, as I said, most of us will pay the £100 so that we don't have to. Well, so that we don't go to jail, in effect. You know, we don't really want to knock somebody over in our car because we didn't get an MOT, because we're anarchists or sovereign citizens, or we're free men, and then we knock a kid over because the brakes don't work at a pedestrian crossing and we spend 7 years in jail. We have decided that it's worth spending the £100. These sovereign citizens in the US, they haven't. And they're quite organised in a way. You know, with social media, they're all in contact with each other, and so they've formed like a club. Think of it a bit like the Royal Automobile Club, but kind of in reverse, where you follow no rules, and you don't do any of the things that the RAC would say you should do. All the AA, the Automobile Association, they've joined up a club like that, except it's like, you know, bald tyres, no insurance, no vehicle registration, don't bother with your number plates, put false ones on, it doesn't make any difference. You have a right to roam, to travel the earth. I don't care what the police officer says, and I will just tell him to go away until he tasers my ass. I don't know. I mean, we do have these things in the UK. You know, we have the anarchists, a little bit of anarchism. We have a thing called the Freeman. It's called the Freeman on the Road movement, but it's not really organised. It's a bit like the Caravan Club. You know, it's sort of it's sort of a sort of quirky. I think it's mainly in theory they talk about it. You know, I should be a free man on the road in the UK. But I do actually, you know, have to. I do get car insurance, but I really shouldn't have to. I think it's more like that, really. But there's something about the US court, which they kind of have a platform in there to kind of make their speech about being a sovereign citizen, and you know, the place is full of lawyers who kind of take on a case, you know, right-wing lawyers perhaps, who would take on a case to show that there is such a thing as a sovereign citizen. Whereas the UK courts, they're much more homogenous, and there's a kind of general understanding that we don't tolerate this, basically. So if somebody walked into a UK store and started going on about I'm a sovereign citizen, I mean, it would just be shut down immediately. So it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. You know, I have got some sympathy with the idea that that we are not allowed or permitted to be truly free, that we have to live within a fairly tight framework. And it can feel very irritating. And I'm just wondering how we could reconcile that feeling. You know, I mean, let's bring it back to basics. We weren't asked to be born, and we landed on this giant rock against our will. We never willed it into existence. The borders are kind of artificial. Morality is an artificial concept. It's not a God-given concept. It doesn't exist anywhere except as part of a philosophical debate. All of these things are completely arbitrary, and so, you know, I can understand how you might feel that you just want to exist upon this earth, making your own decisions and doing your own thing. I will make my own judgment as to whether or not I am fit to drive. I will make my own judgment on whether or not I wish to walk from here across that border. It's just a forest. You can't stop me. Who are you to say there's an imaginary line that's going down here between one country and another? I want to build a cabin on this nice little bit of woodland that I have bought for agricultural prices, €3,000 an acre. And you're saying no to everything. You just want me to do this. You want me to live in a box. You want me to put insurance for this. You want me to, you know, you won't even let me light a fire on a Sunday in the garden so I can keep whatever, all of the bylaws and all of the restrictions. You're not free. Okay, so how do you deal with it? Well, you can become an anarchist and you could ignore every single rule, but you know what the consequences of that will be. And I think the consequences of that will probably be even worse than you can imagine. For reasons that I'm not going to explain now, but I will explain probably in the next video. But there's a simple way of having a reasonable life, which generally is to accept the reality of the situation you're in. Instead of trying to bend and warp reality to fit around your own body shape all of the time, sometimes you just have to accept the world is what it is, and generally things will work out a little bit better. So yeah, that's one thing. Can you not enjoy your freedom within this restrictive framework that you don't really like? Can you not just sort of pay lip service to it? Is that not possible? Without feeling resentful? I don't know, you know. Paperwork's boring, isn't it? You know, paying your license fee, getting house insurance if you have a mortgage, all of these things, these are all mandatory things. Getting into the car when you're sober, making sure you've got the number plates on, making sure this, that and that and the other is right, making sure you don't lie on your CV. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. Okay, and it can be very annoying to navigate through all of this legislation. It's everywhere. You have to register where you are, what you're doing, and now, of course, generally with smartphones, they pretty much know exactly what we're doing all the time anyway. So kind of there's extra layers of surveillance. So are you free? Do you have sympathy with the sovereign citizen? There was a time when I could have claimed that I was a sovereign citizen, and it was between the ages of, I would say, 16 and 25, something like that. I was a sovereign citizen. Now, I can claim that, but without trying to distinguish myself as somebody who was kind of, you know, a real anarchist, a great rebel. because I think everybody was like that when I was growing up between about 16 and 24. We didn't really pay lip service to any rules or regulations. In fact, most of our life was about kind of bending those to suit us. So, if we couldn't afford insurance, we would probably try and get away with it. We would put false tax discs on the car. We would, we would hide in bushes and smoke dope. And I'm afraid we did even worse things than that. I'm not going to go and incriminate myself, but generally I don't think we did follow any of the rules, and we think we tried to get away with as much as we could, which was extremely difficult because at the time the local police force, which was the Thames Valley Police Force, were particularly brutal. And so we really had to keep an eye out for them all the time. We lived on our wits to a great extent. And we didn't always get away with it, but normally we did. We got very good at living off our wits. So I wouldn't want to carry that on through into my adult life, though. I think they got to a point, I think it was when I was in my late 20s. I think that I'd had a court judgment against me. I think it was for not having a tax disc or something. Something like that, or something. I can't remember exactly. And I remember thinking, it was quite expensive at that time. It was about 80 quid fine, which back then, it was a lot of money. And then also, that's right, I got a double fine for something I did. I think I overtook and crossed a double white line at the same time, and that was like 160 quid. And I remember thinking, I think it's time to play the game. It's time to actually try and do things the way that society tells me they should be done. In other words, not to just pay lip service to mandatory rules and regulations, but to actually follow them. And it was quite a simple step, but it didn't half save a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, just resigning as a sovereign citizen and kind of playing the game. And it's almost like shameful to tell people to play the game, because it's not, there's so much antipathy towards the state and towards the police and towards rules and regulations that, and towards authority, of course, that, it makes me sound like some sort of, old Daily Telegraph reader or something. But I just don't want people to go through decades and decades of stress and end up, in places that they can't even imagine, because for some reason they couldn't get the basics done in order to make sure that the framework which we all have to exist within was complete and shiny, and then they could have freedom within that framework. And it seems to me that's not a bad idea.